a lot of people feel like if they move forward, that means they're forgetting, but you're not. You're just bringing them with you, bringing them along on your journey because life is for the living, but grief is for the living as well. It's a huge part of life is to grieve. So those that make it through are the ones that are allowing it to be their counterpart and not just putting it under the rug or putting it in a closet. They're allowing their grief to be a part of them. It's just who I am. So when somebody says to me at the grocery store, "Are you still doing that grief thing?" I'm like, I will always be doing the grief thing. The grief is now part of my life, but I'm learning to live with it and move forward. And no, it's not getting easier, but guess what? I'm getting stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point of view.
When people say, is it getting easier? And I'm like, no, but I'm getting stronger. It's
Right.
not the grief, it's how I'm dealing with it that changes.
You're carrying it with more confidence, maybe with more purpose.
Yes, and the meaning in my life, the writing and sharing with others, that has turned into this huge service for others, which is purpose. Meaning
Yes.
is what you can't sleep at night without doing. It's what you're passionate about, but it doesn't become purpose until you put that into service for others. And you can have all the meaning in the world, and that's great, but until you put it in service of others, it's not purpose. So I try to differentiate that a lot for people. It's great you got meaning in your life, and that's wonderful. But if you want a purpose, you've got to put that into serving others because what happens is when you serve others, you forget about everything that's wrong with you. Your focus is not just on yourself, it becomes focus on others and their needs.
Um, I definitely would tell people she's passed on. I'd say she's passed on, and I didn't like it when people would say she passed away or she died, because to me I was like, no, she didn't. She's just passed on, and it was kind of one of those things that I was kind of I don't know, like kind of stuck on. And I remember one day I was walking with a friend who said something about Esther passing on, and I said, thank you for saying that, because that's what I think. That's what exactly what I feel is that she's passed on. She hasn't passed away, and she hasn't died. And so in that sense, I just remember really wanting people and trying to make sure I said, she's passed on. She's passed, and as time has gone on, because of our culture and because of, just in talking to people who do talk about people, they've died, or, I probably have lessened that just for the sake of the conversation. But yeah, that is an important distinction to me, that um, she's still very, very much a part of our family and has just literally passed on.
Dr. Alan Wolfeld is a leading expert on grief and has written some really fantastic books. One of his quotes that I shared, he said, "I am deeply concerned that individuals, families, and ultimately society as a whole will suffer if we do not reinvest ourselves in the funeral ritual." And what we're talking about here is the difference between grief and mourning. And
Mm.
so, and we need to separate those words because they are different. Grief is what happens to you. When you experience any kind of loss, grief happens to you. That's not a choice. That is a natural response to loss. But mourning is the way in which you handle grief. And that is a choice. And so the funeral ritual is part of the mourning process. And I think one reason people have gotten away from that was because they've put it into a box that says, well, here's what a funeral looks like. A minister gets up there, he reads Psalms 23, we sing Amazing Grace. It's copy, paste, repeat. And so they say, well, that's not what I want. So I'm just not going to do any kind of ritual. Well, many cultures have different rituals for mourning, and you are perfectly welcome to come up with your own. What's important is that it happens,
Mm.
because grief actually is physical. And, you think you're losing your mind. That's normal. You don't have an appetite. That's normal. All these things that make you think you're going crazy are normal. And it's actually a physical response to the loss. And so mourning is a physical response that you have control over. And so when you mourn, when you create a ritual, it allows you to extend what you're feeling on the inside to the outside. And so I kind of want to give an example. So he says that if we don't do that, that we will suffer. And I think I have a few examples of that. One of the biggest critiques that I got from my TED Talk was the one I expected, which was essentially, who are you to tell us how to grieve, right? Many years ago, I worked at a funeral home and we were recording television commercials for advertisement. And the advertising agent had written a script for us. And one of the things he wanted me to say was, there's no wrong way to grieve. And I said, I can't say that. That's not true. It's a nice sentiment. And so if people don't mourn properly, they mourn improperly, unknowingly. And here are my examples. Watch any episode of Hoarders or My 600-Pound Life or Intervention. Every person on those shows has experienced loss. May not be death, right? Loss of a career, loss of a relationship, loss of physical ability. And so they grieve. They can't help that. But because they're choosing to avoid the grief, thinking if I don't mourn, then maybe I don't have to go through it. So what they do is they try to fill that void, and they do it improperly. And so we do suffer. There is a wrong way to grieve. And people have suffered the consequences of not grieving properly. And that's one of the ironies, I think, if people do go to grief counseling. One of the early things they're going to recognize is that the counselor's not making them feel any better by saying, you know what, let's talk about something else, right? This is really unpleasant. That your husband passed away. That's awfully unpleasant. Let's talk about something else, right? They make you talk about it because you have to go through it.